Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and I got a chance to make another card, and unlike my last card that basically took about a week to make off and on between the four kids and all the chaos, I made this in one day, so yay me. Anyway, after the last card, if you haven't seen it, I will hopefully be able to link to it in an annotation here in the video, where I did totally non-traditional, super bright neon colors. I was in the mood to do something a little more traditional for this card, so I've pulled out the WPlus9 Holiday Boughs stamp set, which I got in a haul, I'm not even sure how long ago, a few months ago, weeks, couple months, anyway. Got this set, had ideas to use it, finally got a chance to sit down and use it today. So the first thing I thought of when I looked at this set online was how much fun it would be to use watercolors with it, because I've done several videos painting different brands of watercolors onto my stamps. Really fun. You always get a different look. It's just something really fun to experiment with. And every time it's different. So for today's card, I decided to pull out my Gansai Tombi, if I'm pronouncing that right, hopefully, watercolors. And I've got my little container of water here and my brush. And again, this is something you really just need to experiment with. Just different brands of watercolors have a different effect. The amount of water you add has a different effect, and you just kind of need to experiment to see how much water to add, and then as you add the color, like how much to apply to your stamp. Because if you glop, if that is a word, too much onto your stamp, you can end up with basically a blob of an image. So I just kind of go with it. Sometimes they stamp perfectly. Like this first time, it stamped perfectly. Like it just looked fabulous. And I usually stamp a second time just to get a second impression. Sometimes you can even get a third or more. Just it depends on the image and how much color you've applied. What you can also do is spray your stamp with a tiny bit of water. With these, I didn't bother doing that because they're smaller images, so they weren't sitting for as long. When I've done larger images, like I did a background stamp in a previous video, I had to spray it with water just to kind of reactivate the watercolor before pressing the paper onto it. Whereas with this, because it's so small, I didn't have a problem with it. So I just applied 2 or 3 different colors of green to the stamp and then made sure to stamp it at least twice onto this piece of watercolor paper, which I'm not exactly sure even what brand of watercolor paper I used. I just grabbed a sheet and cut it down. I've cut it down to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and just stamping the different little branch or pine stamps all over the edges of this piece. And you can see some of them stamped a little more kind of blob-like, and some stamped perfectly, and then some with the second impressions, but that just kind of adds to the texture and the fun look of this. So I did that. Once I was happy with that, I grabbed the little pine needle stamp and inked it up with a couple shades of brown watercolor. And I kind of glopped it on the first time there, but still just went with it. And this time I was able to get about 3 impressions from that one. And then I was like starting to experiment a little bit here, and I tried using the little berry stamp, and I wasn't really quite happy with how that worked. So instead I decided I was going to do a little bit of splatter, because why not? So I started with just using my brush and this kind of gold watercolor that is this comes in the big palette. Obviously I always have the biggest version available when it comes to watercolor palettes, colored pencils, whatever. And with this Gansai Tombi palette, the bottom 4 colors, 3 of them are kind of metallic or shimmery colors, and then there's a white. And these metallics are gorgeous. I wish you guys could see them in real life. If you own this palette, you know what I'm talking about. It's just beautiful and so pigmented. So I just picked up the color with the watercolor brush and then flicked it against my finger to get splatter on the cardstock. And then I also did it with red because I thought the red splatter would kind of add to it as well. And then I just let that sit and dry for a while, because with these like blobs of color, it does take some time to dry. And I was impatient at one point and did hit it with my heat tool just to make sure it is completely dry. So once I'm sure it's completely dry, I'm going to grab this Happy Holiday stamp, and this is from the same set. And I just kind of lined it up to see how it was going to fit there on this piece, and then grabbed it with my Fiskars stamp press. And then I got my anti-static tool out because I want to emboss the sentiment, and I definitely don't want the embossing powder to stick to any of this watercolor. Not sure if it would have regardless, but some of the areas were kind of thicker, and of course I got like oils from my fingers on this just by touching the watercolored areas to make sure they were dry. So anti-static powder tool, if you do not own this, it is a must-have. And so I went over the piece really well with that, and then I just ink up the stamp with Versamark ink, and I'm going to stamp this onto the cardstock. And once I've got that stamped, I'm going to emboss this with some gold embossing powder from my stash. And this time I just went with a basic gold. I didn't go with a super fine detail. I usually only like using super fine detail if the sentiment is really small or has like really thin lines, whereas one like this, it's such a large stamp. A regular embossing powder not only works fine, it actually works better because you don't get that gritty look like you do with a super fine detail on larger images. So stamped it, poured over the embossing powder. I always use a coffee filter for that to catch the excess embossing powder so I can funnel it back into the container. And then I'm just going to heat this up with my heat tool until it melts. And this is always the best part when you watch, when the powder all of a sudden just starts to melt. And on here it looks like it's going darker, but in real life, in the light, it just goes like metallic. And it's so pretty. And it's also nice when it does that because then you can see exactly where you didn't get the lighter areas to make sure to hit that with the heat tool, because otherwise it's just going to flake off. And yeah, so much fun. Embossing never loses its like touch. Like I've been doing it since I started stamping. That was always the first like woo wow moment. And yeah, I absolutely love it. So funneled the excess embossing powder back into the container there so I don't waste any, and make sure to put the lids on everything because I have a tendency to knock them over. And then I thought I would just show when I do things like this, like using watercolor in my stamps, the easiest way to clean them is either to use a baby wipe. I usually link to these with a lot of my supplies. I just get the baby wipes, like the Kirkland brand from Costco. I find they are the best for the money, the most sturdy. They don't have a weird smell, and they hold up really well. Depending on what I'm doing, the baby wipe is fine. Now with several stamps like this, or if you've let them sit for too long and the watercolor's dried and it's really caked on, or if you've done a ton of mass producing, I would just take my stamps to the sink over like a little colander or something and wash them with soap and water and they'd be fine. But the baby wipe works great. And then I had just stamped it there onto the scrap paper just to make sure the stamp itself was clean. A lot of watercolors will stain, like these watercolors do stain your stamps, like mine are all stained like green now, but that's fine. As long as they still stamp, it doesn't bother me in the least. Okay, I'm running behind here. I die cut the watercolor panel with the largest die from MFT's Blueprints 1 Dynamics, and then I grabbed this gold glitter cardstock and die cut that with the Blueprints 2 Dynamics, the large die, because they layer together perfectly and I use them all the time. And with the glitter cardstock, you're only going to see that outside edge. So there's no point wasting an entire piece of especially glitter cardstock because it's more expensive. It's a specialty paper and it's pretty. So why waste it when you only need the outside edge. So I just use my paper trimmer and cut out the center. So then I can use that on another project. I can use it to die cut something else, whatever works, but you're not wasting it, and that way you get more use out of it. You could also have die cut, with a larger rectangle die as well, whatever works. But I usually just grab my paper trimmer and do the cutting that way. And then I'm just going to use my Tombow Monomulti, especially when I'm adhering to a glitter cardstock. When you're adhering to the glitter side, because of the grit of the glitter, it's harder to get adhesives to properly stick. And that's where I find something like the Tombow Monomulti is the best adhesive for that, because it kind of like seeps in between the glitter and really holds the cardstock to the glitter. Whereas if you're adhering glitter cardstock like a die cut on top of something else, the opposite side of the glitter cardstock is smooth, so you can use pretty much any adhesive. But when I'm adhering on top of glitter, then I need to use something a little bit stronger, because most adhesives just won't hold after a while, and it'll start to like pull apart, and then it just doesn't look as nice. So did that, and then I have some vintage cream cardstock from, I think this is from My Favorite Things. I'm not even exactly sure the name of it at the moment. I thought it just kind of matched quite well with this watercolor paper that I'd used because it was kind of an off-white sort of color. So I cut that down to 5.5 by 8.5 inches and then scored it at 4.25. So standard A2 size card using my fabulous Teflon bone folder that I rave about all the time because I love it. And then I just adhered the panel with the glitter piece to that again with the Tombow Monomulti. I thought for a second about popping it up on foam tape because I like doing that all the time. But I thought this card might as well keep it completely flat so it's easy to mail. This is the type of card you could really mass produce if you wanted and create a ton of with not a whole lot of effort. And then there is a sentiment included in the set. So I just inked it up with some timber green dye ink from MFT. And as I was doing this, I thought I would like to finish the inside just a little bit more because you guys know I love to finish the insides of my cards. So I pulled out a couple of the stamps again from the set and inked them up with the watercolor. So normally I would have not cleaned my stamps and just set them aside and like done this all at the same time. But as always, I'm flying by the seat of my pants with not a real plan in place and just doing things as it suits my fancy. So I stamped the two images onto the inside of the card, and then without inking them up again, I just did the second impression onto one of the envelopes I had sitting here, just to finish off the whole little set. So you got the stamp card as well as the envelope. At least with that, I was thinking ahead a little bit to grab the envelope and just give that little extra something. So same thing, I inked up the little pine needle or pine cone stamp. My brain just stopped there and stamped it on the envelope, and that's all there was to it. So as always, thank you guys so much for watching, subscribing, thumbs upping, commenting, all of that. I love it. I read all the comments. I really appreciate it. And links to all the supplies and everything will be down below in the description box or down below on my blog. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.